I am here on it is May 10th, Wednesday, May 10th. I don't know about you, but these days just seem to really be going faster as I get older. I don't know. When you're younger, I guess the grind of like going to school every day made it feel like it was taking forever. But I just feel like this time in my life right now, days just go by fast. I'm saying that because it's like May 10th already. I feel like the month just started. Like you just paid the mortgage and bills, and now you got to do it all over again. So it's kind of crazy. But I'm having fun. I'm enjoying life and enjoying being 40. So the thing I turned 40 on April 20th. So now I'm like, you know, almost a full month into being this age, and I'm enjoying it. Uh, a little more tired, I guess, than I used to be. But I don't know. That may just be season going up and down. Anyway, I want to start with reading from chapter 5 of the Gospel of John. Today we're going to be looking at, see me switch around tabs here, but we're going to be looking at the fifth sign. Uh, sorry, not the fifth sign. I was looking at the wrong page here. The third sign, as described by John in his Gospel. And if you remember, our perspective here is that John's purpose is with discussing these signs and also looking later on at the I am statements and just as his gospel in general is for the reader to come to the conclusion that Jesus is the Son of God and that he is the King of Israel. That in mind, his audience, his target audience, are Samaritan Jews and other Jewish people that were not so strongly associated with the Judean elite. And we see evidence of that right here at the kickoff of the beginning of this passage. So John chapter 5 verse 1 is after this, and that's referring to the healing of the guy's son we talked about yesterday at the end of chapter 4. After this, there was a Jewish feast, and Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. Now, right there, as I said, it says a Jewish feast, but if we know our code words and our interpretations and what's going on here, what is probably a better term for Jewish feast is a Judean feast, right? And again, that's John addressing the cultural issues using certain phrases so that his audience knows what's going on, is able to distinguish between the two. And so we don't know what Judean feast it is, but a Judean feast would be a feast that was required in the book of Deuteronomy, one that required people to go to Jerusalem. Okay, which is why it says, verse 1, Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. So whichever feast this was, he was required to go to Jerusalem for it. A lot of people are guessing it's Pesach or Passover, but that's just a guess, right? It could be any number of festivals. There were seven, I believe, that they had to that they could go up for to Jerusalem for. So his use of the phrase Judean feast is just to distinguish, hey, listen, this is one of the big ones, or one of the ones associated with the law that everyone was required to go to. Later on in the Gospel of John, there's actually a reference to the Festival of Lights. That's an example of a non Judean feast. It's not one of the festivals prescribed in the book of Deuteronomy or talked about in other places like Numbers, but it's the Festival of Lights. It's Hanukkah, right? And the reason why that particular festival wasn't in Deuteronomy or Numbers or whatever is because the the background of that happened between what we call the writings of the Old and New Testament, but in that time of Maccabees and if you know your history there, like the story of it and the oil didn't burn out and all that stuff, and so that's why it's not in there, right? But the Jewish people began to celebrate it, and that's what started this idea that there are Judean festivals and there are non-Judean festivals. And non-Judean festival example of that, Festival of Lights, what we call Hanukkah today, um, and and so that's an indication right there that that John is addressing a crowd that would have distinguished festivals in this way. They would have they would celebrate the Festival of Lights, and that would be a non-Judean. festival, right? So some evidence to go along with the idea that John is addressing non-Judean Jews, the Judean elite especially. Now it says now in Jerusalem there's a pool by the sheep gate called Bethzatha, which is also known as Bethsaida in our English. Again, that's a tree of life version of reading, so they try to hold on to the names and keep their more Jewish sense. It's called Bethzatha in Aramaic, which has 5 porches. In these, a crowd of invalids was lying around, blind, lame, disabled. Okay. Now, a certain man had been invalid there for 38 years. Seeing him lying there and knowing he had been that way a long time, Yeshua said to him, "Do you want to get well?" The invalid answered him, "Sir, I have nobody to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. While I'm trying to get in, somebody else steps down before me." Yeshua tells him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." Immediately the man was healed. He took up his mat and started walking around. Now that day was Shabbat. So Judean leaders were saying to the man who was healed, "It's Shabbat. It's not permitted for you to carry your mat." Now here, translation does a much better job saying Judean leaders, right? Pointing out the specific people that were known for wanting to keep the law, wanting to keep, a more strict view of following the Torah, and one that they had established. And so here they were like, you're not supposed to be picking up your mat and walking around on the Sabbath. But he answered them, "The man who made me well told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who told you, 'Pick up your mat and walk'?" But the man who had been healed didn't know who it was, for Yeshua slipped away into the crowd in that place. Afterwards, Yeshua finds him in the temple. He said to him, "Look, you've been healed. Stop sinning, so nothing worse happens to you." The man left and told the Judean leaders that it was Yeshua who had made him well. Interesting. Because Yeshua was doing these things on Shabbat, the Judean leaders started persecuting him. But Yeshua said to them, "My Father is still working, and I also am working." So for this reason, the Judean leaders kept trying even harder to kill him, because he was not only breaking Shabbat, but he was also calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Therefore Yeshua answered them, "Amen, amen, I tell you, the Son of Man cannot do anything by himself. He can do only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. For the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he does. He will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whomever he wants. The Father does not judge anyone, but has handed over all judgment to the Son, so that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him." We'll be done here, I think, because we could keep going. Easily end up reading the whole chapter. So, some really interesting things, like as I'm doing this research, I'm doing this study and everything else. Some translations, especially like the King James, I'm not sure if the New King James does it as well, but there are some verses that didn't read here, right? And my Bible, my paper Bible here, what do we call this now? It's like digital Bible and the real Bible, whatever, tangible Bible. I have the Christian Standard Bible here, and it has a note about these missing verses that the King James might hold. In fact, what I could do is go ahead and pull up the King James Bible here. Let's see, King James, the Procol version. That's fine. Still find in it the Gospel of John. It just has some extra. Oh wait, no, that's not it. That's just the Apocrypha. So let me just go ahead and open up my library, look into the King James. And I'll definitely have to make this bigger for you. So let's see. Let's see what these verses were that were held off from the translation we read, and a lot of translations now take these verses out. So it's starting in what they label as verse 4. You'll notice that in your Bible, it ends with verse 3, and there's actually like a second half to verse 3 that's also removed. So it's what you'll find in most Bibles is in these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, and then it stops there. Okay, but and then it goes on to verse 5. That's what we read earlier. Now the King James, they include this passage here. It says, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. Then it goes on to verse 5. Okay, so that's the King James. As we looked at earlier, this translation and others don't have it. They do have a note here, like it shows the 4, that there was a verse 4, but it's been removed. Now, how does that kind of happen, right? How does that thing kind of happen? Well, the reason why it's been removed from newer versions. Remember, the King James version was made 1600s, 1700s, and at the time it was made, they used a certain set of manuscripts to translate into English, right? And in those manuscripts, that verse and a half was there. Now, as time went on, and we look at the manuscripts that we have, we see that there were some older manuscripts, old manuscripts that are older than the ones that the King James uses, that did not have that verse in it, okay, or that verse and a half in it about the angel stirring water. So what that tells us is that the older manuscripts are closer to the original manuscript, right? We don't have copies of the original manuscript that was written by John. It's just doesn't exist. But we have ones that are, in terms of time, very close to the original date that John was written. Okay, even if we hold on to the 60 CE date, they're like early 100s. We're talking about the date of the manuscript that we have, and at some point, as the manuscripts were being copied, because nobody had printers or computers, or whatever. So as the manuscripts were being copied, at some point, some copyist added this information about an angel stirring water. Right now, the motive behind that is clear. Is that they just wanted to kind of like add some clarification about verse 7, because verse 7 says, uh, the invalid answered him, Sir, I have nobody put me in the pool when the water stirred up. When I try to get in, somebody else steps down before me. So at that point, if you don't have those verses, you're like, well, what does that mean? Like, he has nobody put him in the water and the water stirred. And so a copyist adds in this information about an angel stirring water, that an angel would come down and stir water every once in a while, and an angel of the Lord nonetheless. So not only did this copyist wanted to clarify that this was happening, but this copyist also wanted to clarify that this is happening in reference to the God of Israel and not any other god or gods. Okay, so it was the angel of the Lord. Now, as we said, earlier manuscripts don't have these verses in there, so it's more likely then that the original didn't have it, right? Because they don't just pop up, they don't disappear. It's not like the original had it and they disappeared and then it came back again. More like the original didn't have it. At some point, somebody added that in. Now, uh, that's why we need as many copies and manuscripts that we can get to verify the authenticity of the copies that we have and translations that we then have from there. And so from a historical perspective and an archaeological perspective, that's really important. Okay. Uh, and so then what does this mean, this stirring of the water? Well, what's really interesting is that the Eli uh, Lazorkin uh, commentary that I have, right? The one that's by, I always forget how to pronounce the name, Eli Lazorkin Eisenberg. In his commentary, he shares about the discovery of this area. Okay, at first it was thought that this pool didn't exist. Okay, it says that those 5 colonnades. So he says that what was going on was that people were looking for like something that was shaped like a pentagon, because you think about the five, and so you're thinking like in the shape of a pentagon, and so nobody could find that. But eventually, a pool was discovered that had five roofed colonnades that was near the sheep gate, which is what is described here by John, and that these pools were built next to, or sorry, I should say, this pool was built next to what's called an Asclepion, an Asclepion. And an Asclepion was a like healing center that was dedicated to the Greek Roman god of well-being and health, known as Asclepius. Asclepius. So you had Asclepius and you had these Asclepions. Okay, uh, and it's been discovered then that an Asclepion was there, uh, and so now the picture starts to make more sense as to what's going on here. There was an Asclepion that was built, and it wasn't unusual. If you remember, I mentioned earlier the area was Hellenized, which is a way to say that the Greek culture had strongly infiltrated and influenced the region. If you know your Old Testament history, you know that first the Assyrians came, the Babylonians, then the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks. And while our stories, and you have the Maccabees and stuff, they describe that, but what we have in like our canon kind of stops with the Medes and Persians, but there are other sources that tell us about life uh, during the Greek reign and the Roman reign, and there was a lot of stuff going on there when it comes to uh, knowing about.
One moment.
I got Siri acting up here. Give me a second. So there's a lot of information here out there about the time period when the Jewish people went back into Israel from from their Babylonian reign, and the Medo-Persians let them go back, with the book of Nehemiah and Ezra and all that kind of stuff. But just understand that the Greek culture and the Roman culture had really like permeated throughout the region and throughout the area. And one of the signs of that culture was right near the temple. Not too far from the temple, there was an Asclepion. And again, Asclepion was just this place where people believed they would be healed, right? Either by medicine, so it's kind of like a hospital, but then also by miracles. Okay, and so there was devotion to Asclepius and devotion to Asclepion, these Asclepions, all throughout the region, because hey, if you're going to get healed, you need to be healed by Asclepion. And Eli Lizork and Eisenberg also mentions that the daughters of Asclepion were Hygeia and Panacea, which is where we get the words for hygiene and panacea. And so there's like really uh, a tie into it. And he talks about how there was a cult of Asclepions, of Asclepius, and their symbol was a snake wrapped around a pole. And we use that in medicine, something similar to that today. Talk about the AMA and Doctors Association, that's this pole with a snake wrapped around it. And so anyway, the point is that at this time, this it's evident based then, if we take out verse 4, which tried to make this about the God of Israel, and we just understand what was going on and what the history was. This man was waiting for the stirring of waters to be done by a Greco-Roman cult of healing. Okay, that's what he was waiting for, and he wasn't able to. And the stirring of the waters, which it's just like you have layers in the pool. It's just like they would release the water from another source into this pool, and then it would just mix in. It was like, okay, now's the time to get in. So it wasn't like someone was going down and stirring this water. It's just the stirring meant really like the mixing up of the water. And so this man had been waiting there along with a bunch of other people. That's why it says there's a large number of disabled, blind, lame, paralyzed. It really it fits contextually to think that they were in like this medical center or this healing area. And some of them would be able to be healed by the work of the people who worked there on behalf of Asclepius, the cult members, whatever they're quote unquote, we can call them doctors, whatever they would do. And others were waiting for a miracle, right? Which is what this guy was waiting for. I'm sure that other people, they try to heal his legs, whatever, but it just never happened. And so he was waiting for the miracle aspect, and he could never get into the water on time. And it makes more sense than, like, culturally this is what was going on. It also makes more sense with the narrative and Jesus talking to him about his sin. In John chapter 9, he heals a man by another pool, the pool of Siloam, and we'll talk about that pool. But that pool seemed to be more in line with the Jewish uses. And in that one, like, he doesn't tell the guy, that he sinned, that he needs to stop sinning, whatever. But in this one, he does. And what Eli Lazork and Eisenberg posits is that perhaps the reason why this man was waiting here was because he wasn't really kind of faithful to the Torah and to the Jewish ways. Okay. Which is something that, like, a reader in this passage, like, understanding, oh, in this time frame, or someone who lived after this, shortly after this, they would know, like, oh, he's at the pool of Bethesda. Yeah, the five colonnades. Yeah, that's that place, the Asclepion. That's where people go to get healed. Well, pagan place though, and we don't go to that place. We don't go to that place. But what? There's a there's a man there. Is he a Jewish man? And certainly he was. He was a Jewish man, because he was told later when he carried his mat that he wasn't supposed to do that on Sabbath. And the Judean leaders wouldn't bother telling a Greek person or a Roman person or just someone who was from a different culture. Like, they wouldn't bother telling them to not do that. They would only do that with their own people. And so if they saw him doing that, you can very easily assume that he himself was Jewish. He's in Judea, so he's Judean, and yet he was participating in this pagan ritual. Stands to reason that perhaps he had been worshiping some pagan gods. Talking about, like, the Greek gods and the Roman gods, that he had been involved with that, which is certainly was happening at that time. And it makes more sense then why Jesus tells him in verse 12, sorry, in verse 13, see, you're well, do not sin anymore so that something worse doesn't happen to you. That's the translation I have in the Christian Standard Bible. Later in verse 12, sorry, in verse 13 here in the TLV, it says, look, you've been healed, stop sinning so nothing worse happens to you. So similar, right? The idea that Jesus is actually rebuking him for being where he was and for doing what he was doing. Okay. And it really makes sense that if he was there with Asclepius and Asclepion and trying to get help through that, because he had been worshiping false idols and worshiping false gods, then it really makes sense as to why Jesus would tell him, hey, don't keep getting involved with this sin of idol worship and worshiping a god other than the God of Israel. Like, don't keep getting into that, right? And it's also interesting that Eli Lazork and Eisenberg also mentions here that this might be why he goes and tells the leaders who told him to pick up his mat, because he might have been offended. That's really reading into text conjecture, but it is strange that the man went and reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. And I think when we look at chapter 9, we juxtapose those two stories of the man who was born blind and this man. That man was, like, standing up for Jesus and ended up getting thrown out of the synagogue because he was standing up for Jesus. This man went ahead and was like, yo, this is who healed me. And so maybe it was because of the sin factor, because he didn't like to be told, that he was doing something wrong. I don't know. It's a really interesting idea. Like I said, it's not my own. Eli Lazork and Eisenberg is the one who writes it as perhaps what was going on here. And I tend to agree with him. But what's really interesting, though, overall, is that again, these signs are written so that the people who are reading them can understand and come to the conclusion that Jesus is the Son of God and that he is the King of Israel. And here you have the king walking into a Greco Roman vicinity and finding one of his lost people, someone that belonged to him, and reclaiming him back for the kingdom. Now, whether or not the man, doesn't sin anymore, as Jesus tells him to not sin anymore, whether or not he obeys that directive, we see what the king of Israel is supposed to do, and that's to go out and call the lost sheep of Israel back into the fold. Okay, that's like what he's there for, and so that's something the king of Israel is supposed to do. And so, and not only does he go into a place and do that, but he does it with such great and power and authority that he can only do that if he is the Son of God. And if you notice, when he tells the man, when he heals the man tells him, in order for him to be healed by this miracle or this act of another god or whatever, uh, then I need someone to do something for me. I need someone to put me into this water. And Jesus shows his authority as a Son of God to go into this Greek thing, this place of idolatry. Really, it's a worship of another god. It's like a big major altar. It's another temple. And he simply tells him to get up and walk. He doesn't need to do anything else other than heal him and with his authority. And so the reader looks at that and says, wow, he walked into this place and he just told the guy to get up, and the guy got up and was healed. I mean, only the Son of God can do that. And so, as the King of Israel, he walked into the place and he reclaimed one of his own for himself. And as God, he healed him without anything having to do anything, without having to put on a show in any kind of way, uh, any other steps, putting something in his eyes, which Jesus has done in the past. It's kind of indicative of like medicine and healing and using the earth, use mud in your eye and go wash it off, whatever. It's not that. It's straight up the power over the sickness, the power over the disease, the power over the whatever was going on, this disability, and telling him to get better. And so here we have the third sign. So this is the third sign to show that Jesus is the Son of God and that he is the King of Israel. Uh, and I read these passages for a reason. I read a bunch of verses after the initial healing happens, and it's about the Sabbath. And I wanted to point out that the reason why John includes this in this narrative is because, again, the Son of God factor comes into play. And the Son of God, he responds to their accusation that he's doing these things on the Sabbath. And Eli Lazorkin makes this point about the emphasis on the word sometimes on the Sabbath. He's doing these things on the Sabbath. It's not, maybe the emphasis should be on these things. He's doing these things and he's doing them on the Sabbath. An indication, something that the Judean leaders need to understand. Oh my goodness, uh, this guy is performing like these great miracles and he's doing it on the Sabbath. Like, we need to get him under our control. And that's exactly the response they have. They persecute him. Verse 16, the Jews persecute him because, why? He did these things, on the Sabbath. His power is growing and his authority is growing, and he's going to be known as the Son of God. He's going to be known as the King of Israel. And so in verse 18, he says, he tells them, like, hey, listen, my father's still working. I'm still working. The Jewish perspective is the reason why we believe God is still working, right? And from the Jewish perspective, is because children are still being born. Right? Life is still coming into the earth. Like, that's just one simple thing to prove that God is still working. Like, he might have rested that first Sabbath, but he's been working on the Sabbath since then. And so Jesus is saying, if my father's working, then I'm going to keep working too. And so and it says in verse 18, the reason Judean leaders kept trying to even harder to kill him is because not only was he breaking Shabbat, but he was calling God his own father, making himself equal with God. And again, John is writing this gospel and he's trying to show like who is responsible for Jesus dying. It's not the Samaritans who rejected him, although they did that, but that's not why he died. Uh, it's the Judean elite leaders that put this plan into process because they understood his claims as being the Son of God. And it's another thing that John addresses. In case there was any doubt in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or sorry, Luke again, written after we take the earlier date. So if in case there's any doubt in Matthew and Mark that Jesus ever claimed to be Son of God, here I'm writing something to show it for everybody to read it that yes, he did make that claim. He didn't walk through life like kind of hinting at it. He didn't beat around the bush and say he might have been God or not really make that claim. Just in case anybody was having doubts, I'm going to write this gospel and I'm going to tell you that he says that he is the Son of God. And so not only is it the signs, but it's also the words, which we talked about yesterday. It's not just the signs, it's also the words. And it's something that Jesus, uh, Yeshua, is hoping for, that people can hear him and hear the truth and believe it and not have to see signs. But for those who need signs, John provides 7 of those for us. Now, I'm going to wrap up here with the mental health aspect of the lesson. And this one is one that I've made in my classes for years. And I did hear it from another pastor, the one who married us. I remember him talking about this when I was there going to the church, and it comes out of verse the application and the highlight comes out of verse 5. Excuse me, not verse 5, verse 6. Seeing him lying there and knowing he had been that way a long time, Yeshua said to him, "Do you want to get well?" Now, uh, when I was listening to this sermon years ago, the pastor said that the word there should actually be wish. So let's look at that. So John, so we're looking at an exegetical guide. We're going to look at the original language, John chapter 5, verse. Oh no, it's verse 6. Uh, verse 6. We'll enter, and we'll let the software do its thing. Going to do its breakdown, the search. Do you want, now you see it's highlighted, do you want to get well? So I go to click on this phrase because I want to see what this phrase means in the Greek. And you can see it there for yourself. The word is
Fellow.
thelo, which means wish or want. And we can look at other dictionaries, the desire, to want, to wish. The Western Dictionary, it says to will, wish, desire. Okay. Uh, why is that important? Why is that important? Well, I'll bring it back here. To wish. It's important because think about the context. Think about what Jesus is doing. There's a man who's been disabled for 38 years. And if he knew that Nathaniel was standing under a fig tree before his brother went to go get him, then he knows what this guy's been doing for the last 38 years. He knows the struggle. He's been laying there. He's, devoted to Asclepius, and he's praying, and he sacrifices whatever, bringing stuff to whatever he might be doing. He's desperately just trying to get into this pool. And you would think that out of the kindness of their hearts, people would be like, "Yo, this guy's been here for 30 years. Let's let him get a turn this one time." But everybody wants their own. Everyone's seeking after their own desires, right? And at some point, when you see everybody else getting their desires come true, because if he's been waiting there 30 years and he's been seeing people get better and healed, it has to happen, right? Or why else would you wait 38 years? If it was me and I waited one time and this guy jumped in the water and came out and nothing happened, he was still blind or whatever he was trying to get healed from, be like, "Oh, this isn't work. I'm going to leave." But if he's been waiting to 38 years, and it must have been like, let's say it's been happening once a year for 38 years, like 38 different miracles, and he's like, "Oh man, like when am I going to get my chance?" When you see someone else getting uh, getting what they wish for, um, over and over again, you see other people getting what they wish for, getting what they wish for. It's very easy to then lose hope to lose hope, to become hopeless. And if you notice, his response was, I have no one to put me in the pool. So he has hope that the pool will work. But when Jesus asks him, like, what do you wish for? His answer indirectly is, I wish for someone to drop me into the pool. Because that's where his hope is, right? His hope is that the pool will heal him, and he believes that's going to happen. And so Jesus asked him, "What do you want?" As we look at there, you can see the Greek word, actually the better translation might be wish. So, what do you wish for? What do you wish for? And the greatest thing he could wish for was that someone would put him into the pool so he can be healed. And I say that because the way Jesus heals him, he does it without any of that. He just heals him. He just says, "Get up and walk." And so the greatest wish should have been, like, what do you wish for? Could have been, should have been that I be healed. But he'd been looking at this world for so long, this world that he'd built himself into, and this belief system, and this whole thing with Asclepius and Asclepion and the pool and everything else. He couldn't think outside of that world and outside of that box that he had put himself into. And he's like, this is the only way I can be healed. So what I wish for is someone to throw me in the water when it stirs. So I got to wait for this water to be stirred. Will you hang out here and throw me into this water? And Jesus says, just get up and walk. Right? And I remember, when this pastor was going through this passage, and just what I kind of do in my classes also, just remember this idea, him asking us also, like, what do you wish for? And when we're honest and we talk about what we wish for, sometimes it's hard to even come up with something. We can talk about stuff we want. Like, I know what I need. I need finances to pay my bills. I need this, I need that. We're in a place right now where we a couple years ago, I was like, I want a new car, but my car is a 2006 and my wife's is a 2007. So for a while, we're like, oh, we want a new car. We didn't need one because they both worked fine, but they're at the point now where it's just like getting older, and they're getting older, and working on them is becoming more and more expensive. So really, it's like we want a car. Uh, it's or no, sorry, we need a car. So we're beyond the want. Someone asked me, like, what kind of car would you wish for? Like, wow, I just working with engines and stuff. Like, I wish for something electric that also doesn't have any issues that I'm not going to have to worry about for the next 15 years. Because I had this car since 2006, so it's been 17 years, and so I want a car that's going to last me. That's like what I wish for, right? Like, um, but how about if we think outside of my world, the restrictions here? It's like, well, you know what I really could wish for is that I could fly. I could just fly and go wherever I want to go without needing a car. Okay, that would be awesome. That'd be a wish come true. And for this guy, like, the being told, "Hey, get up and walk," is probably that level of wish. Like, I wish I wouldn't have to be here anymore. I wish I'd be walk. I wish I'd be healed. Right? I could run and jump and be strong again. Like, that's what I wish for. But he was just limited in what he could think of, and so he said, I just want someone to bring me there. And when it comes to living in this world, it has a way of knocking us down and knocking us down and knocking us down. Where even when we have wants, we're like, I don't need it. And so we knock it down. Like, I want this. You don't need it. So knock it down. Um, and whatever it might be in life, there's lots of ways for the world to just like drop us and drop us down. It's not, I'm not like the world, like the nefarious world. I'm just like experience that we have in this world where we just have a hard time thinking beyond anything basic or what we have. And mentally speaking, that can lead to the loss of hope, right? And when we lose hope, we become hopeless. We can find ourselves in a place of despair. And despair is just this, like, not only can I not have hope, hope isn't even possible. I can't even imagine hope. And when you get into that cycle, it's like a death cycle of hope sorry, hopelessness and despair, and you just kind of like cycle into it and cycle and hopelessness and despair and hopelessness and despair, you find yourself in a place where life is no longer livable. And it's obviously, you think about these terms and these big words. It's a dangerous place to be. And sometimes, asking someone who's been in this cycle, what do you wish for? It can be revealing as to where the limitations are in their head. I can ask someone who's like been extremely depressed, like, what do you wish for? And like, wish, can't wish for anything. And that's how it can get really bad. And one of the things that you can do, like with mental health and with therapy, is trying to get someone to dream again. This really comes down to like dreams and wishes and desires. And can you imagine like what his dream would have been? But the best he could come up with is someone put me into that pool whenever it's stirred. And I said, let's say it happens once a year. Let's say it's been happening once every 5 years or once every 10 years. So it happened like at the 10th year of waiting, and someone was healed. He's like, oh shoot. Then it happened again at the 20th year of waiting, 10 years after the first 10, and he's like, oh shoot, I missed it. And then 30 years comes. So now he's like 2 years away from it possibly happening again. And that's Jesus has so much more to offer, right? He has so much more to offer. He's like, what do you want? What do you wish for? I can give that to you. And in this context, the person had to stop sinning. But in chapter 9, that context, there was no sin. It just was a matter of God being glorified in that act. And so it's something I want to ask anyone who's listening. What do you wish for? Are you even able to wish? And think about your wishes. Do your wishes speak to the freedom you have to do whatever it is, to say to a mountain, like, move from here to there, like this great, just freedom and faith? Um, is it there, or are you boxed in? Are you boxed in with your wishes? And if you feel like you're boxed in, here's what you can do. Right, a little bit of homework. Get some get something to write with, a journal, whatever, something private, and just write down like, I wish for, and then have blank lines and just start filling the blank with as many things as you can think of. And then look at that, and then look at that list you've made, and then draw a box, draw yourself inside of it, and then take that list of words or list of wishes that you were able to come up with, and just label the outside of your box with it. Then you'll see, okay, this is where I'm at, and be real with yourself. Like, this is the best I can wish for. Okay, and start praying outside of that box. Like, if for me, like, if I could wish for, I honestly, like, I just want a car that runs, is reliable, and is going to save money on gas, right? So it's like a basic wish that I have. Like, I don't want anything more. God, like, in humility also, like, that. So if I put that on the box, then I start praying for something outside of that. Let's say it is like flying, like I'm going to fly, right? And it's not that, I'm going to get that, but it's just to expand my mind and my hope and my ability to see what God can actually do, right? I'm going to ask for the most craziest thing out there. Not necessarily because I think I'm going to get it, but because I want to see what God's going to end up doing anyway. And it's a great place to be, because it helps you to get out of that cycle of despair and hopelessness that can trap you, and that'll bring you into death. And what we want is life. And what he offered to give us was life eternal and life in abundance. And so, and I'm not talking about manifesting stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about just like getting out of your own head and the limitations of your own mind, to be able to understand that God is so much bigger than that, right? So if he were to ask you, right, what do you wish for? What would you answer him? All right, so I'm going to end it there. I hope that was helpful and useful. And so remember, tonight we have our gaming session. We've been playing Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. My daughter's like kind of into it now, like wants to beat it. I want to beat it too. Been playing it for so long. You tune into that, and I'll probably be asking her, what she wishes for. And it will be interesting to see, I think, from a child's perspective, the kind of freedom they have, like the kinds of things that they can wish for, will kind of usually speak to just like that child like innocence, not innocence, but just that lack of time in the world for them to be pressured down and beaten down and boxed down so that their wishes are almost non existent. Anyway, thank you again for watching. God bless.